That's the melody that Sharon asked for in yesterday's class. Achenu, request fulfilled. Let's light up the darkness. It was a video on YouTube recorded 15 years ago. I think it was also being sung, for the strength of people, of soldiers at war. Some images were shown. And that video is called Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, shared by somebody named Rosh Chinuch. Rosh Chinuch. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Erev Yom Kippur. So it's not quite dark here, but tonight we begin Erev Yom Kippur. And so the day before Yom Kippur. And recall that as much as it is a commandment to fast on Yom Kippur, which begins tomorrow night, Friday, it is also a mitzvah to eat, and to eat heartily, on the day before Yom Kippur, right? So as much as you eat, and eating between meals, don't hold back. Tonight and tomorrow day is a time to eat. It's a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. Joe in the Inland Empire, Yehuda in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Paula's here, Lorraine in Texas, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Tom, wishing everyone a good Erev Yom Kippur, and it's skipping on me, and Shandora, Shalom from the Georgia-South Carolina state line. Wow, so did you go north to avoid the storm? I heard from Chaim that thank God he's good and Aoife's okay, and I hope everyone who's with us who was on the west coast of Florida and the east coast. I mean, the news has just been so frightening. These tornadoes where they did terrible damage. I think that's where a lot of the fatalities were, and that was on the east coast of Florida. So please God, I hope everyone in our class was spared, and everyone who, and family and relatives and friends of our community, I hope everyone was spared. And if they need help now, that they should get it, and we say amen. Yael is in Washington State. Jonathan in Thousand Oaks. Sharon says, Sai, the Talmud cat, was really excited by that song. Lucy in Minnesota. Tom asking for mechila, asking for forgiveness. This is something we do now also in these days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we'll make a profound and emotional and heartfelt atonement, asking God to forgive us But for our sins against other people, we have to ask them for forgiveness. So, my dear friends, I ask you to forgive me if I've misspoken, if I should have prepared better, if I missed something I should have said or said something I shouldn't have said, and in any way I've given offense or been negligent, I apologize from the bottom of my heart, and I hope you will forgive me. And Bill checking in from mid-Missouri, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Frank in San Pedro, Spencer in Connecticut, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. I'll just mention quickly on my Facebook page and on my TikTok and on Instagram, where I'm probably most active when not on Facebook, Accidental Talmudist. I just made a very short video describing a new documentary that's being put out by the Wall Street Journal. It's 23 minutes, and it's called Get the Jew, Crown Heights Revisited. And it's about the 1991 pogrom, which is what it was, that started with a tragic accident and then led very quickly to the murder of an innocent Jew in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And it really should have ended there, but local leaders, politicians, the media fanned the flames and really created a terrible, terrible situation, which was really a riot against Jews. That included people chanting in the streets like Hitler should have finished the job, things like that. And the kinds of things that we've been hearing in the last year, when Jew hatred, when anti-Semitism, it's rearing its ugly head. But in a very short documentary, and it's free, and it's online, it's available now, and I put a link there in my bio, and right here on Facebook, my bio has links, to various things, including this new movie. It's not my movie. I had nothing to do with the movie, but I was really struck by this movie, and I highly recommend you watch it. And really, I mean, just the way that Jew hatred can erupt at any given time, and truthfully, it's not only against Jews, but that such a thing can happen. But somehow, eruptions of Jew hatred, just seem to come more often than against any other group, and it's been that way for thousands of years. And just the way that it happened, I'd heard of that incident. I didn't know the details. I didn't know what the lead up was and how it became a public thing, and how the media and these politicians and leaders who should have known better, the way they fanned the flames. Very much recommend that. So that we have a link for it here at Accidental Talmudist, link in bio, or my Instagram. Go check that out when you have an extra 20 minutes. Okay, our daf today is page 111 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8, and we've been talking about the law of inheritance. Primogeniture, that the firstborn son, if there is a firstborn son, that doesn't only mean that the oldest kid in the family is a boy. It also has to mean that the firstborn of his mom, was a male. And today we're going to get into the nuances of that a little bit. But we've also been deriving, and it's just so interesting, that the Torah speaks to some of these basic issues, that the firstborn gets a double portion, that if a son dies before his father, that the father is going to inherit from the son. The Torah doesn't say exactly that, but it speaks to some of these laws, and then the sages had to derive the rest. And once they're deriving the rest, they want to test, well, how do we know that a son does inherit from his father? What if the father leaves a brother? How do we know that the brother doesn't inherit ahead of the son? How do we know that a daughter inherits from her father? How do we know that a wife can inherit from her husband, and in the situations where she does, and with situations where she doesn't, etc.? These are the general issues that we have been talking about. So we continue at the bottom of page 110b. And our daf today is 111. So the Mishnah teaches a man, with regard to his mother, inherits from her and her relatives, but does not bequeath to her. Right? So a mother does not inherit from her son the way that a father can inherit from his son, meaning if the son didn't leave a child, but he dies in his father's lifetime, so then his property will go to his father, and then when the father dies, it'll go to his brothers if he has brothers and other children of his father. A mother does not inherit from her son the way that a father does, but a son does inherit from his mother. So how do we know this? The Mishnah teaches a man with regard to his mother inherits from her and her relatives, but does not bequeath to her. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? And the Gemara answers, now we're on page 111a, as the sages taught, the verse states, and every daughter who possesses an inheritance from the tribes of the children of Israel, that's Numbers 36, verse 8, and noting the plural in the phrase, not just every daughter who possesses an inheritance from the tribe or her tribe, but rather from the tribes of the children of Israel. The Baraisa asks, how can a daughter inherit land from more than one tribe, from two tribes? Right? The plural implies that at least two. So rather, this is referring to a daughter whose father is from one tribe, but her mother is from another tribe, and that both parents died. She didn't have a brother, so she inherited from both of them. Therefore, it can be seen in this verse that a daughter inherits not only from her father, which we learned yesterday. If she doesn't have a brother, she inherits from her father, but also that she inherits from her mother. And the Baraisa continues, I have derived only that a daughter inherits from her mother. From where do I derive that a son inherits from his mother as well? So you can say the kal v'chomer inference. Okay, so that's usually translated here in the Koran using a Latin term, a fortiori. But we'll just use the Hebrew term, kal v'chomer, usually translated as how much more so. So if in this case, where we don't have as much law to lean on, we do it this way. Then in this other case where we have more law to lean on, or a more obvious example, how much more so would we apply the same law? That's how we usually state this. So you can say with a kal v'chomer inference, and just as a daughter whose power is diminished with regard to her father's property, in that she does not inherit when there is a brother, when she has a brother from the same father, yet her power is enhanced with regard to her mother's property in that she inherits it. So with regard to a son whose power is enhanced with regard to his father's property in that he inherits ahead of his sister, is it not logical that his power is enhanced, right? All the more so, is it not logical that his power is enhanced with regard to his mother's property? And the Baraisa continues, and from that place that you came, i.e. from the inference that was just stated, one can say the following. Well, just as there is with regard to a father's property, a son precedes a daughter, so too here with regard to a mother's property, a son precedes a daughter. This is the opinion of the first Tana, right? So we know because it was a patriarchal system, and again, this is in the absence of a will, of parents can decide what to do with their assets, and how they're going to distribute it to the children, etc. But in the absence of a will, we're going to follow this patriarchal system. So a brother inherits and his sister doesn't, right? So the brother inherits. He's going to be responsible for taking care of his sister the way his father was. He's stepping into the shoes of his father. But if there is no brother, right, if there's only a daughter or daughters, we learn from that incident when the daughters of Zelophehad asked this question of Moses, and Moses asked God, the father died, he had only daughters. Are we going to say that because only sons inherit, that these daughters don't, and we're going to therefore take his property and give it to his brothers or his uncles or something like that? And the answer was no, the daughters inherit, right? So we clarified that there. Now we're asking, well, what about a mother? So if a mother dies and leaves a son, okay, so it seems that the son inherits. If the son is not, she doesn't have a son, but she has a daughter, so then this daughter is going to inherit. And as we'll see, now that we've seen, okay, well, a son inherits ahead of his sister, whether he's inheriting from his father or from his mother, and that's going to be challenged. Because maybe they should inherit equally from a mother, even if a brother inherits ahead of his sister from a father. Maybe it's not the same for a mother. And then the next question we'll ask, well, the firstborn son inherits a double portion when his father dies compared to his brothers, if there's more than one boy. Are we going to say the same with respect to the inheritance from a mother? Let us see. So the Brisa continues. So the Brisa continues. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yosei, said in the name of Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatzav, both the son and the daughter are equal with regard to the mother's property. Meaning if there's a boy and a girl and the inheritance is all coming from the mother, they divide it equally. The son doesn't take precedence over, the brother doesn't take precedence over the sister. And what is the reason for this? Or the son doesn't take precedence over the daughter. And what is the reason for his ruling? It is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from a kal v'chomer inference to be like its source. According to this principle, a law derived by means of a kal v'chomer inference cannot go beyond the laws of the source from which it is derived. Since the law that a son inherits from his mother was derived via a kal v'chomer inference from the law that a daughter inherits from her mother, it cannot be that this inference should lead to the conclusion that the son precedes a daughter in inheriting from the mother. The Torah doesn't state explicitly that a son inherits from his mother. It does state that a daughter inherits from the mother. So we're going to say, okay, we can learn out, well, if a daughter inherits from her mother and daughters don't have as much inheritance rights as sons do, so then kal v'chomer, the son is going to inherit from his mother just like a daughter would. Okay, so we learn that out through a kal v'chomer. Now, are we going to say another kal v'chomer that since sons inherit ahead of their that sons inherit ahead of daughters when inheriting from the father, all the more so they should do that when they inherit from the mother? According to this, no, because we have a general principle that when you derive a law that's not explicitly stated in the Torah through this kal v'chomer principle, all the more so, we don't add greater stringencies on top of it. It is sufficient that it's the same as what came from it. So a daughter inherits from the mother, therefore a son can also inherit from the mother. But we're not going to add on top of that the son not only inherits from the mother, but also inherits to the exclusion of his sister when they're both inheriting from the mother. Now the Gemara asks, and that is the ruling of Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatzav. Will this ruling hold up? Let's see. The Gemara asks, and doesn't the first Tana of our Mishnah also interpret verses employing the principle of it is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from a kal v'chomer inference to be like its source? But the principle of it is sufficient, which limits the extent of a kal v'chomer inference, is found in the Torah. So how could he disagree with it? As it is taught, and where do we learn this principle of that when we use a kal v'chomer, we can't arrive at a ruling that is stronger than the ruling that it's based on, because you're right, a kal v'chomer is not going to create a new law that's more stringent than the law that it's based on. How do we know that? As it is taught in a baraisa that explains hermeneutical principles, how the sages extract laws that are not explicitly written in the Torah from the Torah. How do they do that? So first, how does a kal v'chomer inference work? Well, the verse states with regard to Miriam, the sister of Moses, after she spoke lashon hara, right, gossip, about her brother Moses, right, when she said, she sort of spoke about Moses that he was an inadequate husband, in the sense that he was not paying attention to his wife Ziporah, because he was so busy being the prophet and leader of 2 million Jews. It's not easy to be the leader of Jews on a camping trip when there's 3 of them, let alone 2 million. So, Moses was busy. And part of his busyness was that he was a prophet, the greatest prophet who ever lived. Because a prophet has to be in a state of ritual purity. When he's receiving prophecy from God, he can't be tameh, he needs to be tahor, ritually pure. And a man, after he has had an emission, like after he has sex with his wife, so then he's tameh, just because any man, who has sex, he's tameh afterward. And then, in order to be tahor, he has to immerse in a mikvah and await nightfall. But Moses needed to be ready to receive prophecy at any time. So he made the decision that he wasn't going to have, he wasn't going to make love with his wife. And that's not fair to his wife, right? Now, it's also true that Moses was approaching 120 years of age at this time. But let's put that besides the point, because we also learned that Moses was as vigorous at 120 as a man in his prime. His strength was not abated. Okay, so the point is that Miriam, in her concern for her sister-in-law, for Moses' wife, was talking with Moses' brother Aaron like, well, this is the situation. Don't you think we need to do something about it? She meant well, but she was gossiping about her brother. And so, with regard to Miriam, after she spoke ill of her brother Moses, that God then struck her with saras, right? With the skin condition we've talked about, physical expression of a spiritual malady, very often associated with lashon hara, evil speech, gossip. And so, her skin turned white with the saras. Then Moses prayed on her behalf and she was healed. But because she had saras, she was going to have to spend a week outside the encampment, sort of thinking about what happened before she rejoined the community. And the verse says in Numbers 12:14, and the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not hide in shame 7 days? And the verse is saying that if a father spits in the face of his daughter, meaning that he reprimands her, she would feel shame for 7 days. Kal v'chomer, how much more so it is derived that Miriam, who suffered the more severe reprimand, not of a father rebuking her, but of God rebuking her directly, should be ostracized for 14 days. Right? If she would be ostracized for a week because her father rebuked her, how much more so she should be rebuked if God does the rebuking. And when God does the rebuking, it should not be just 7 days. We'd think at least double that, 14 days. But that's not what happened. The Kal Vachomer was simply used to say, well, if she would have to be ostracized for 7 days because her father rebuked her, how much more so does she need to be rebuked because, does she need to be ostracized because God rebuked her? But the rebuke only lasted, or the ostracism, being banished outside the encampment, only lasted 7 days. So the how much more so was, well, if her father rebukes her, how much more if God rebukes her? So we're certainly going to apply the same banishment outside the camp, but we're not going to say that the banishment for her father is 7 days, so for God it should be 14. We're going to say it's the same 7 days. All the more so she gets that banishment, but we don't make it a worse banishment, a bigger banishment, a longer banishment, even though it's coming directly from God. So that's where we learn out this principle of what a Kal Vachomer is, and the fact that we don't extend the new finding to be any more stringent than the finding from which it was taken. Rather, it is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from the Kal Vachomer inference to be like its source. So her punishment cannot be longer than the punishment of one who's reprimanded by a father. In any event, the principle that begins with "it is sufficient" can be seen in this verse. So how does the first Tana rule that a son precedes a daughter with regard to a mother's property? Meaning, if we're learning out that sons inherit from their mothers, from the fact that daughters inherit from their mothers, why would we further say that not only does the son inherit from the mother, but where there's a son and a daughter, the son inherits ahead of her, right? Takes precedence over her, and she doesn't inherit. Why do we say that? We don't say that because of this principle that we just learned from Miriam. And that's the reason why Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatsav rules that when a boy and a girl inherit from their mother, they inherit equally. He doesn't take precedence over her. The Gemara answers this question. Generally, the first Tana also interprets verses employing the principle that begins with "it is sufficient." Yes, he agrees with that principle, but it is different here with regard to inheritance. As the verse states, Numbers 36:8, and every daughter who possesses an inheritance from the tribes of the children of Israel. And the verse juxtaposes the tribe of the mother to the tribe of the father. The mother comes from two tribes. Her mother's tribe, her own mother's tribe, and her father's tribe. The daughter comes from two tribes, her mother's tribe and her father's tribe. Therefore, the first Tana holds that just as with regard to the tribe of the father, i.e. inheriting from one's father, a son precedes a daughter, so too with regard to the tribe of the mother, i.e. inheriting from one's mother, a son precedes a daughter. Meaning, we learn out from the fact that a daughter inherits from her mother, that therefore son also inherits from the mother. But we learn out that the son precedes the daughter from a different, different words in that verse. Namely, the idea that he's getting an inheritance that comes from the father's tribe and from the mother's tribe. Now, the Gemara relates, Rav Nitai thought to perform an action, meaning to issue a ruling, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatsav, who says that boys and girls inherit equally from their mother. Shmuel said to him, to Rav Nitai, in accordance with whose opinion do you wish to issue this ruling? In accordance with the opinion of Zechariah? Zechariah is nil, i.e. his statement was not accepted as the law. Right? When Zechariah ben Hakatsav said that boys and girls inherit equally from their mother, sounds nice, but it's not the law. It's not the accepted law. We have this other derivation that is the accepted law. So even though you heard something from a sage, sounds like it's the law, it's not. And if you don't know that the rest of Israel has accepted a different ruling that preceded the ruling of Zechariah ben Hakatsav, then you're going to create a problem in Israel because you're going to issue a ruling now that contradicts the established halacha, the established law. Rav Nachman said to him, Rav Tavla also performed an action, meaning he issued a ruling in accordance with this opinion of Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatsav. And Rav Nachman said to him, what is this? And Rabbi Tavla said, as Rav Hinana bar Shalamia says, in the name of Rav, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Zechariah ben Hakatsav. And Rav Nachman said to him, go retract your ruling. Right? Okay, you heard it from this guy in the name of Rav Zechariah ben Hakatsav, and a few other people have heard this, and now it's starting to gain a little bit of traction, but it's not the law, right? It's not the law, and you could see how easily something like this could happen in a world where there's no internet, there's no telephone, there's no telegraph, right? All there is very slow-moving correspondence, and local rabbis issuing rulings, and very quickly something could start spreading which contradicts established law. And so when a higher level sage becomes aware of it, he's got to nip that in the bud. Says to him, Rav Nachman said to him, go retract your ruling, and if you do not, I will take Rav Hinana bar Shalamia, who's ruling in the name of Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatsav, out of your ear, i.e., I will punish you severely for ruling against the accepted halacha. And the Gemara relates further, Rav Huna bar Chia thought to perform an action. Another sage, this came up, trying to issue a ruling according to this other interpretation of the law, that boys and girls inherit equally from their mothers. in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatsav. And Rav Nachman said to him, what is this? And Rav Huna bar Chiya said to him, as Rav Huna says, that Rav says, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatsav, right? This like rumor kind of took off. And Rav Nachman said to him, shall I send a messenger to Rav Huna to ask him if that is indeed what he said? And Rav Huna bar Chiya was embarrassed, as he was not sure whether Rav Huna had actually said this thing. So Rav Nachman said to him, now, if Rav Huna were to have died, you would have been brazen enough to say before me that this is what he said. But since he is still alive, you're not so brazen. You're not so sure. You know, I'm a senior rabbi to you. I have more experience than you. I know what the accepted law is. You and your, young meddlesome pals are trying to spread a new law. That is not the law, right? And you were so brazen that you were going to say not in your own name, but in the name of some sage older than you. But you weren't so sure when I challenged you on it. And the Gemara asks, and he, Rav Nachman, who's so sure that the law is not in accordance with Zechariah ben Akatsav, in accordance with whose opinion does he hold? As we've just seen, there were various sages who all tried to rule in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatsav. Why did Rav Nachman not agree with them? And the Gemara answers, he holds in accordance with this statement of Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel often debated with each other. When Rav and Shmuel agree on something, you can be certain that that's the law. And Rav and Shmuel both say the halacha, the law, is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatsav. Now, the Gemara relates an incident. Rabbi Yanai, who had already grown old and whose eyes were dim, would walk leaning on the shoulder of Rabbi Simlai, his attendant. And Rabbi Yehuda Nesia came toward them. So who is Rabbi Yehuda Nesia? We've heard many times of Rabbi, right? So Rabbi was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, who redacted the Mishna. So when we're talking about the Mishna, that was edited and formalized, and the authoritative edition issued by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. His grandson was named Rabbi Yehuda Nesia, and he was a great sage in his own right. And Rabbi Yehuda Nesia's grandson, right? So now we're talking about 4 generations later than Rabbi, was also named Rabbi Yehuda Nesia after his own grandfather, and he was a much lesser sage, right? Less prominent, not quite so respected, etc. We're talking about this Rabbi Yehuda Nesia II, right? The later one, who was not as respected, neither as respected as his grandfather, and certainly not as respected as his great-great-grandfather, Rebbe. And that's who we seem to be talking about here. So, Rabbi Yanai, who's old and kind of blind, is leaning on his younger attendant, Rabbi Simlai, and this Rabbi Yehuda Nesia II is coming toward them. So Rabbi Simlai, the attendant, says to the older, dim-eyed Rabbi Yanai, the person who is coming toward us is handsome, and his cloak is handsome. Did he just mean that he has a handsome face and that his, that his clothes are handsome? There's some notes here that says what he meant was this is a sage, and he's a sage with some standing. So when Rabbi Yehuda Nesia II reached him, Rabbi Yanai felt his cloak, which either means he felt his clothing or sort of questioned him to see, is this really a sage? Right? So when Rabbi Yehuda Nesia II reached him, Rabbi Yanai felt his cloak, and he said to Rabbi Simlai, well, concerning this cloak, its measurement with regard to the laws of ritual impurity is like the measurement of sackcloth. Meaning, for sackcloth to become impure, it had to have a minimum measurement of 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths, like 16-inch square. Whereas fine cloth, because it's a more significant item, fine cloth is much more expensive than sackcloth, can become tameh with a smaller measurement of 3 handbreadths by 3 handbreadths, because it is more significant, because it is finer. And what Rabbi Yanai is saying is that, well, the clothing that this guy's wearing that you just said is so handsome, it's lower quality, right? That's why you need more of it for it to become tameh. But metaphorically speaking, what he's saying is, this guy might be a rabbi, he's not so much of a sage. Why are we learning any of this? Why are we suddenly digressing to this incident when Rabbi Yanai met Rabbi Yehuda Nesia? Because during this conversation in the street, Rabbi Yehuda Nesia II met Rabbi Yanai and asked him, from where is it derived that a son precedes a daughter with regard to the mother's property? How do we know that boys and girls, that a son and a daughter don't inherit equally from their mother? Just like a son, it has precedence when inheriting from a father. How do we know that a son has precedence when inheriting from the mother? How do we know that? Rabbi Yanai said to him, as it is written, Numbers 36:8, and every daughter who possesses an inheritance from the tribes of the children of Israel. Same source, but how are we going to learn out from it the precedence? So the verse juxtaposes the tribe of the mother to the tribe of the father. And this teaches that just as with regard to the tribe of the father, a son precedes a daughter, so too with regard to the tribe of the mother, a son precedes a daughter. But Rabbi Yehuda Nesia persisted and said to him, well, if so, if these two laws are in fact juxtaposed, then the following should also be derived. Just as with regard to the inheritance of the father's tribe, a firstborn takes a double portion, so too with regard to the inheritance from the mother's tribe, i.e. when he inherits from his mother, a firstborn takes a double portion. And there we're not going to go. So what we've learned so far is that just as a daughter inherits from her mother, a son can inherit from his mother. When there's a son and daughter of the same mother, and she dies, the son takes precedence over the daughter. Now we're saying, well, what if there are two sons? Does the older son, when the two boys are inheriting from their mother, does the older son take a double portion? That's what Yehuda Nesia II is saying to Rabbi Yanai. Are we going to learn out that principle also? Now we're on 111b. Rabbi Yanai says to his attendant, right, Rabbi Simle, take me away from here, as this man does not desire to learn, but is instead raising difficulties that are easily resolved. Now, it doesn't sound like it's easily resolved. It sounds like a very legitimate question to us, but who knows what the tone of the question was? Who knows what the rest of the conversation was? We're only getting one question and one answer. I think we can safely assume it was a longer conversation than that. And there was something about this Yehuda Nesia II that bothered Rabbi Yanai. And what is the reason? But what is the reason? If Rabbi Yanai is saying this is easily proven, that there is no double portion when two sons are inheriting from their mother for the older son, what is the reason for that? Abaye said, the verse concerning the double portion received by a firstborn son states, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. That's from Deuteronomy 21:17, indicating that he receives a double portion in all that he has, meaning the father, not in all that she has, meaning the mother. So primogeniture does not apply when two boys are receiving an inheritance from their mother. This is presumably the mother's a widow, their father has already died, he's not inheriting from his wife, that's why it's going to her children. So if there's a boy and a girl, the boy inherits ahead of the girl, though he has an obligation to take care of the girl. If two boys are inheriting, they split it equally. The older one does not get a double portion. And the Gemara asks, and why not say that this statement applies in the case of a bachelor who married a widow? I.e., a man who marries a woman who already has children from her first husband, so that the firstborn son is his firstborn, but not her firstborn. But in the case of a bachelor who married a virgin, so too the law will be that their firstborn son will take a double portion from the mother's inheritance. Why not say that? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, There is a different derivation to teach that law, as the same verse states, for he is the first fruits of his strength, Deuteronomy 21:17, indicating that the law of the double portion is stated with regard to his strength, the father's strength, not her strength, thereby excluding a son who is the firstborn of his mother alone. The Gemara challenges this. But that verse that you're using to prove that point is required to prove a different law. The law of a child who came into the world after his mother gave birth to non-viable newborns who did not reach the full term of 9 months. If she miscarried, let's say she miscarried and the miscarriage was a male fetus. Well, that emerged from her. So wasn't that the firstborn? Right? Like if there's a firstborn son who lives, to have a childhood and then he dies, and then when the mother finally dies, she leaves, let's say when a father, a mother has 3 sons. The first one, though, is a miscarriage. And then there's 2 other boys. So are we going to say that this second male that issued from her is not the firstborn because she had a non-viable offspring, a miscarriage? Or do we say that he is the firstborn? If she had 3 children, right, and one of them died in childhood, and now there's only 2 that have survived to adulthood and who are alive when the mother dies, or let's say even when the father dies, so this was really the second son and the third son, then when the father dies, that second son is not considered the firstborn. So those 2 sons split equally. There is no primogeniture. But are we going to say the same about a son who never had a childhood, who was just a male fetus that she miscarried? Are we going to say that, that the second male that issued from her is in fact the firstborn, or do we not say that? Let's keep reading. Yes, that verse is required to derive the law of a child who came into the world after his mother gave birth to non-viable newborns who did not reach the full term of 9 months, miscarriages. And this verse teaches that such a firstborn son should be a firstborn son with regard to inheritance, even though he is not a firstborn with regard to the mitzvah to redeem one's firstborn son. So very interesting. Here we're going to have a bifurcation in how we address a firstborn. That for the purposes of inheritance, if she had a male fetus miscarriage, and then the next offspring was a boy, that boy is considered a firstborn for the law of inheritance, and therefore he gets the double portion. But in terms of pidyon haben, the redemption of the firstborn, which is a ritual you do, I think when the boy is in his first month of life or when he reaches 30 days. I forget exactly when you do it. And then you bring in a Kohen and you give him kind of a symbolic amount of money, 5 shekels, and that's called redemption of the firstborn. But you don't do that if the first issue from her womb was a male fetus that she miscarried. Then the next fetus, does survive. So when he grows up, he'll be a firstborn for the purpose of primogeniture, but we don't do the pidyon haben. We don't do the redemption of the firstborn ceremony with a Kohen and giving him 5 shekels when the baby reaches 30 days. That's what we just learned. Now, how is this law derived from that verse? Well, the term his strength, his first strength, the father's first strength, is understood as referring to acute mourning in the following manner. A firstborn son for the purpose of inheritance of land is only one whose father's heart is pained about him when he dies, i.e. a son who lives beyond birth. Like he was actually born, he was a baby, he lived in the world a few days, as opposed to a miscarriage. Excluding this non-viable newborn whose father's heart was not pained about him in the same way as one mourns for a child, who actually lived in the world. Therefore, the next viable son to be born after a non-viable newborn is considered the firstborn for the purposes of the law of inheritance, because it talks about he was the son of the father's first strength. Now, the Gemara the Torah describes him that way. So the Gemara answers, if so, that the sole purpose of the term his strength is to teach that law, let the verse say, for he is the first fruit of strength, omitting the possessive his, as in his strength. The first fruit of strength, not the first fruit of his strength, represented by the letter Vav. What is derived from the more expanded term his strength, which indicates specifically the father's strength as opposed to the mother's? Conclude two conclusions from it, both with regard to mourning and with regard to the status of the firstborn as being the father's heir specifically. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty, but one can still say that this statement applies in a case of a widower who married a virgin, so that he already has a firstborn from his previous marriage, who is the first fruit of his strength. And the son born to him and his second wife is not the first fruit of his strength, and it is this type of firstborn who does not inherit a double portion of his mother's estate. But in the case of a bachelor who married a virgin, so too the law will be that their shared firstborn will take a double portion of his mother's inheritance. You might have thought that. Rather, Rava said there's a different derivation teaching that law, as the same verse states, the right of the firstborn is his, and the emphasis on his indicates that the primogeniture applies specifically to a man, and the primogeniture does not apply to a woman, whether the woman is the one inheriting or is the one bequeathing, right? So if a man dies and he leaves two sons, then the firstborn son, if both have reached adulthood, the firstborn son gets a double portion. But if a man dies, and he's not around, and the mother leaves an estate that she inherited from her own parents, that's why it's from her tribe, and now she dies and leaves children, and if she leaves two boys, the older boy does not get a double portion. Now we've proven that. The Mishna teaches, and a man with regard to his wife inherits but does not bequeath. Now we're going to talk about a wife inheriting from her husband or a husband inheriting from his wife. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? That a man inherits from a wife, but a wife doesn't inherit from a man. Because if he has children, the estate goes to the children. The children will have to support their mother, the man's widow, but she doesn't inherit from him. That's according to Torah law. Now, as we've said a bunch of times, this is in the absence of a will. A man can certainly make a will and bequeath all that he has to his wife, and halakhically we honor that will. But in the absence of a will, this is how it would work. So, the Mishnah teaches, and a man with regard to his wife inherits but does not bequeath. From where are these matters derived? The Gemara explains, as the sages taught in a Baraisa, the verse concerning inheritance states, and if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his kinsman who is next to him of his family, and he shall inherit it. This kinsman is one's wife, and the Torah teaches that a husband inherits from his wife. As the Gemara will explain later, one might have thought that she should also inherit from him. Therefore, the verse states, and he shall inherit it, with the word it written in the feminine form ota, which can also be translated as her. And this teaches that he inherits from her, but she does not inherit from him. And the Gemara questions this, but the verses are not written like this. The verse states that his kinsman inherits from the deceased, so that if the term is referring to one's wife, a wife should inherit from her husband. And Abaye said, answer like this, i.e., as if the verse were split into two parts. The first part is, then you shall give his inheritance to he who is next to him, which is a general statement with regard to the inheritance of relatives. The second is his kinsman, and he shall inherit it, meaning that his husband inherits from his kinsman, who is closest to him. That's his wife. So he inherits from her, but she doesn't inherit from him. Rava says, does a sharp knife cut verses? How can you split the verse, rearrange it, and omit letters from its words? Abaye's derivation rearranges the words and then drops the letter lamed from the term to his kinsman, le'eshero. So rather, Rava said, this is what the verse is saying, and you shall give the inheritance of his kinsman to him. The letters should be arranged differently, removing the letter lamed from the word leshero, but keeping it and the letter vav from the word nechalato, and combining them to form the word lo, meaning to him. So accordingly, the verse teaches that a husband inherits from his wife. So the Gemara explains that Rabbi holds that the sages subtract and add and interpret homiletically, meaning that letters can be removed from words and appended to each other, and a law can be derived from the new word formed by the combination of letters, but you can't drop the letters altogether. So the Gemara comments, and this Tana cites the law that a husband inherits from his wife from here, as it is taught in the Baraisa, and he shall inherit it, with the word it written in the feminine ota, which can also be translated as her. And this teaches that a husband inherits from his wife, and this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva, similar to the derivation cited in the Baraisa above. Now I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And I'll just mention that as sort of strange and sort of off-putting as this sounds to the modern ear, so patriarchal, so patrilineal, remember that these laws were derived in a time when the whole world was patriarchal, but especially when patrilineal inheritance was very important because people were defined by tribes, right? And so the land was apportioned in the land of Israel according to tribes. And so they had to have rulings where, as much as possible, property was going to go from a father to a son. And if you're going to have, if it's like the woman is going to inherit from her husband, and he's dead, and now she is going to go marry some other guy, right, who's from a different tribe, then she's going to bring that land with her to this other guy, and now you're going to start quickly breaking apart the tribal regions of ancient Israel. So that's another reason why this patrilineal inheritance was so important to the political system. It wasn't just kind of a family, men lording it over women thing. There was a kind of important legal geographic reason for these laws. But again, even so, you could, I don't know that they even had so much of a will back then. There was gifting, etc. There was deathbed giving, so there was a will. In modern times, where this kind of consideration is not so important, the will can fully supplant these laws. But if a person doesn't leave a will, right, and it's a from family, then these laws are going to be applied. So all the more reason, make sure you have a will. Let's get back to where we were. Okay. Now, the Gemara comments, and this Tana cites the law that a husband inherits from his wife. So from his wife, and he teaches that a husband inherits from his wife. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva, similar to the derivation in the Baraisa above. Now, the Baraisa quotes another Tana. Rabbi Yishmael says, this derivation is not necessary. As the verse states, and every daughter who possesses an inheritance from the tribes of Israel shall be wife to one of the family of the tribe of her father. Numbers 36:8. The purpose of this mitzvah was so that the land she inherited from her father's tribe will not be transferred to another tribe upon her death. So the verse speaks of a transfer of inheritance from one tribe to another by means of the husband, i.e. she must not marry a man from another tribe so that the land will not be transferred to that tribe when her husband inherits from her upon her death. Right, so I just said it's bad. It's a problem if she inherits from her husband and then she goes and marries another guy. Okay, so she doesn't inherit from her husband, but we still have the problem that she inherits from her father. Right, so if she didn't have a brother, she inherits from her father. She's going to go marry someone else, and she's going to bring that land that she got from her father to her husband. And if her husband's in a different tribe, big problem. For that reason, there was a major preference that she should marry within her tribe to keep that land within that tribe. But this indicates that a husband inherits from his wife. That's obviously built into the system, and that we know that a husband inherits from a wife from the way this was stated. Finally, then I'm going to go to questions and comments. One final teaching. Rabbi Yishmael says we can derive this from another verse in the Torah, from Numbers 36:9. So shall no inheritance of the children of Israel transfer from tribe to tribe. 36:7, Numbers 36:7. And then another verse states that Numbers 36:9, so shall no inheritance transfer from one tribe to another tribe, also indicating that a husband inherits from his wife and that it's problematic for a wife to inherit from her husband. When we pick it up tomorrow, they're going to bring verses from other parts of the Bible, from the prophets, from the book of Joshua, and then a proof from Chronicles, which is the portion of the Bible known as writings, right? The Hebrew Bible is known as Tanakh, which is Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. So we'll continue with proofs brought for this principle from the prophets and the writings, God willing, when we pick it up tomorrow. Tomorrow's Erev Yom Kippur, also Erev Shabbos. So we'll have our regular Friday time, which will be noon Pacific. Then, no class Saturday night. We're just not going to have a class at the end of Yom Kippur. We'll be 2 week and needing that break fast. And then we had published a schedule that we would have class on Sunday and Monday. That's being revised. I apologize. We won't have class on Sunday and Monday. Nina and I have had a schedule change in our own lives, so there won't be a class on Sunday and Monday. So after tomorrow, Friday, our next class will be Tuesday. That's going to be that Tuesday between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So we'll have class Tuesday at 6 p.m. and then Wednesday at noon, because Sukkot, the holiday of Sukkot, begins Wednesday night. Right. So tomorrow we have class Friday noon Pacific. Then no class until Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific. Let me take some questions. And Nina, let's make sure we revise that schedule in that post on Facebook and maybe share it again with the updated schedule. Tom, what if the mother is from a different tribe than her husband and therefore son? She inherits from her father because he had no sons. Does that property go to her son or back to her father's tribe? You asked that before we just had that conversation. Perfect instinct to ask that. Sharon, if the daughter is the older, does she get the double portion? You asked that before because there is no double portion. Well, maybe you're asking, what if there are two daughters? Does the older daughter get a double portion? No, she doesn't. So no double portion when inheriting from the mother. Maybe you're asking, what if there are two daughters inheriting from the father? Does the oldest daughter get a double portion? I'm pretty sure she does not. There's only double portion when we're talking about the firstborn son. And if he's not the firstborn, right? If he has an older sister, then he doesn't get a double portion either. Sharon, why does the Torah say Miriam's and Aaron's Lashon Hara have something to do with his wife being a Cushite? Why does the Torah say that? I don't know. I don't think that this Torah says, well, the Torah says something like that explicitly with regard to, I think the Torah says because she's a Cushite, like that her skin is dark, and implying that what Miriam said was some kind of a different gossip or slander than the interpretation that I gave, that it was against Moses and that he wasn't making himself available to the wife. This was derived by our sages elsewhere. I don't remember. I just know that we learned that in the Gemara. I can't remember where and how they derived it. But even though it's not explicitly stated, that's what our sages said was the Lashon Hara. So I don't remember how the sages derived it. Great question. I wish I knew the answer offhand. Bill, I always noted in that story that it never says that Ziporah complained. And while we know Moses was still hale and vigorous, Ziporah was also not so young. And maybe that gives further support to so why was Miriam bringing it up, And again, every time there's a conversation and an interpretation in the Torah, it's not like these people, spoke 10 sentences in their whole life. Obviously, there were much longer conversations. A lot more was going on. The Torah recorded only these very few details, and then the sages learn out from those details. Now, one way they learn out from it is that they make, connections to using where the same word is used in another context, where this same character, behaved a similar way or a different way in another context, and sort of making interpretations from logical deductions. But we also have traditions that were passed down from Moses to Joshua, to the elders, to prophets to the men of the Great Assembly, etc., that oral tradition, there were certain teachings that were passed down, and we are expected to understand and believe and have full faith that certain things are known because of that oral tradition, like the way that tefillin are made, which the Torah never describes explicitly, and which is not something that the sages just figured out 1,000 years later, because people were wearing tefillin. So the tefillin was described by God to Moses, and Moses, described it probably to the craftsmen who made the first sets of tefillin there in the wilderness. And finally, Sharon, Pidyon Haben is after 30 days. This is the redemption of the firstborn. And it cannot be a C-section birthday either, as has to be born vaginally for the Pidyon Haben to apply. Thank you, Sharon, for that clarification. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, tomorrow, Erev Yom Kippur, Erev Shabbos, Friday, noon Pacific will be our class. Have a great night.